Welcome to another episode of the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. I'm Tom Schwab, and I've been leveraging targeted podcast interviews since 2013. And along the way, I've continued to learn and improve results, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive in with Kristen Nolan, one of our senior client account managers. We'll be talking with Tiffany Meenk, our marketing manager here at Interview Valet. You see, Tiffany has a deep understanding of what it takes to turn podcast guesting into podcast interview marketing. And that's a powerful marketing tool. We're going to focus today on how to build and optimize your marketing funnel specifically for podcast interviews. Tiffany is going to walk us through the steps you need to take before, during, and after each of your podcast appearances to ensure you're capturing leads and converting them into clients. Whether you're just starting out or you're looking to fine-tune your strategy, this episode is packed with actionable insights to help you get the most from every interview. So here is Kristen and Tiffany.
Thank you, Tom. Joining me today is Tiffany, our marketing manager, to discuss building your marketing funnel for podcast guesting. You often counsel our clients on building lead generation magnets and lead funnels specifically for podcast interviews. Tiffany, do you want to give a brief background on who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kristen. Well, like you said, I am the marketing manager for Interview Valet. I've been here about 3 years, but overall, I've worked in marketing for over 10 years now. And I have to say, podcasting is such a unique opportunity and an untapped market for a lot of people. So I have learned so much in the last 3 years of doing marketing with podcasts. And I'm excited to talk about that here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to have a conversation and share that with our audience. So let's dive right in. So from your perspective, how does podcast guesting differ from other marketing channels?
Like I said, I worked in marketing for a long time. And what I have found to be so unique about podcast interview marketing is just really that opportunity to really get to know someone and share your expertise through long form conversation. It is not a 30-second social media ad. It's not even like TV. You know, even many of people that we've worked with have done TV appearances, right? And it's very rigid, or radio even, it's very rigid. You have 30 or 60 seconds to talk, do your elevator pitch, and get out the door. So podcasting really offers an opportunity to have genuine conversation. And it's just raw and authentic. It's not so scripted, right? Those are usually the best ones. We always say the best podcasts feel like you're eavesdropping on a conversation between friends, right? And you really don't get that with any other marketing channel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it also offers the potential client the opportunity to get to know you. What is your expertise? What is your background? What do you have to offer versus, a post on LinkedIn kind of cold outreach, right? Or like, how many times have you gotten, a message saying, or an email saying, hey, I want to sell you something. So I think it's definitely, super effective with that whole connection piece and sort of trying before you buy, essentially.
Right. And you get the chance to, anybody can talk and say a pretty spiel for 60 seconds, right? And look so polished and professional. But during a 30, 45-minute conversation, you really get a window and a feel for who they are authentically, right? On the inside as a real person. So I think that's one of the reasons why they're so successful for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. It builds that like, know, and trust very, very quickly. Awesome. So what type of businesses often see the most success with podcast guesting?
Absolutely. Well, like we just talked about, it's really those businesses that we call them like high touch or high ticket sales, right? These are your coaches, consultants, investors, any professional service businesses and firms, where their client base, you're really involved, right? You're really become intertwined, where as their provider, as their coach, their consultant, you really get immersed intimately into their business. Because again, those take more conversation, right? You're really trusting when you bring in a coach or consultant or if you sign on to invest with someone, I mean, you're putting a lot of trust into that person. You're being vulnerable. You're peeling back the layers of your business. And so again, that ties in directly to what podcast guesting allows people to do and connect on a genuine level.
Yeah. So it's more of the relationship based, interaction versus like transactional, right? There's some companies that are, you sell once and you kind of move on to the next and you move on to the next. Whereas, what you're saying is more of that relationship based where you become a partner versus just a salesman.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a one and done. Hey, buy these $20 headphones. It's a relationship. It's an ongoing connection where really, your values, you have to have similar interests. That's important when you want to partner with someone.
Awesome. Well, how can guests prepare their marketing funnels before their podcast appearances to optimize their effectiveness?
Absolutely. This is probably the biggest thing that I coach our clients on, podcast guests on the most. I'm always surprised. I'll have a high level, multi-million dollar firm talking to them. And I'll ask them, what are your marketing funnels here? How do you want to capture people from your podcast interviews? And I'm surprised at how many are not prepared for that. I think the biggest thing is to put yourself in those listeners' shoes, right? So you guest on a podcast. I'm guesting here on the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. What is going to bring those listeners from this show over to my website, right? What is that connection? What is that bridge there? What do they care about? What do your ideal clients need from you? Is that a form? Is that a book? Do they need to go straight to a consultation? So it's really, that's the number one step, is to really just step back and think, what do they need from me to bridge that connection over to me and to decide I'm the person to solve their problems.
That's a great perspective. Would you say it's important to target the right podcast to align with the guest's marketing goals?
Oh, absolutely. That is probably, aside from having a good marketing funnel, right? That is the key to making all of this work. We always say you're going to get more results talking to 10 of the right people than 10,000 of the wrong ones. So I would say market message alignment is key to podcast interview marketing success, right? It needs to be a synergy. We've seen that with many clients who come through, right? Everybody wants to be on the big shows. I want 100,000 listens a month or something. And we're like, honestly, from almost a decade of tracking data, we've actually found that that's not really the case of what converts sales on podcasts. It's really those smaller niche audiences who are looking for your very specific services and the unique way that you serve your clients versus any other investing firm or any other coach or consultant. So I would say niche audiences are important here and understanding that.
Yeah. And I think it's important to identify that, right? I get a lot of clients that, they're very broad, and I sometimes will have to say, okay, let's niche down. Tell me about your top couple of clients. What do they look like? What podcasts do they listen to? And we source various databases to find that information, right? So, I have a client, and he's a keynote speaker. And so one of the things that we do is we track which websites his target audience is. And we find podcasts that, the people are listening to these podcasts, they visit this website. So we're able to utilize a lot of resources and tools to ensure that, the podcasts that we're finding for our clients are the right podcasts with the right target audience.
Yeah. And we've also seen it opens an opportunity to identify niche markets that you maybe didn't know, right? Like the client you mentioned, you might start seeing a trend that this specific audience really resonates with him. I know we saw that with Craig Cody. He is a CPA. Doing podcasts, he was casting a wide net, right? He is offering his CPA professional services, and through podcast guesting, found that he really resonated with dentists. We're not sure why. They liked him. He worked well with them. And it became this thing. So he was able then to niche down and move into more specific audiences and talk directly to those. And it just compounded his results.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things is that some people don't realize there's literally a podcast for everything. Like you want a podcast dedicated to like laundromat owners, we've got that for you, so there's a little something out there for everyone. So, whatever that target is, it's nice to be able to, kind of also utilize it as a resource to sort of test those markets, right? Is it a dentist? Is it, a medical office? Is it, a laundromat owner, right? So there's various options and target audiences there within that space to venture down as well.
Absolutely. We saw last time I counted, there was around 12 or so podcasts dedicated solely to pickleball. And you're like, what could these people talk about on 12 different podcasts about pickleball, right? But if you think about it, if I am a pickleball supplier selling items, that is my audience, right? You have hit the jackpot, and you're opening that window that you couldn't talk to that audience who is self-selected to hear about pickleball in 30, 45-minute increments any other place, right? So I definitely identifying your audience is a key, a stepping stone to getting results.
So in your experience, what types of content converts best for podcast guests to capture leads at the different stages of the marketing funnel?
Great question. I would say to start, you want to look at it as the pre-interview prep and post-interview marketing, right? So there's kind of two parts to it, to making this whole marketing pie. That pre-interview prep, you want to go into, like I said before, put yourself in their shoes. What does your audience need from you? What will help them bridge that gap between that podcast and you? Is that an assessment? Is that a downloadable guide? Is that 7 things you need to know about investing? What is it that they need from you to start building that know, like, and trust, and wanting to take next steps with you? It's always shocking to me when businesses come in and don't have at least one call to action built out. And in podcasting aside, how are you expecting to capture and engage with those leads on a future basis if you don't have some type of way to capture them? So I would say, and you need to just really sit down and identify what that is for your audience. There's no cookie cutter answer of what that is. But some we've seen, like I said, assessment, quick download guides, your book, a webinar, or even those that, book a consultation or book a call. Any of those, it depends on your market and what they need from you.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great sort of bridge into chatting about our welcome pages. So I think those are the most effective ways for podcast guests to convert listeners into leads or clients directly from a podcast episode. Can you give us a little bit more background on the value that welcome pages bring and how we can utilize those in the best way?
Again, this is tying into the calls to action. First off, all digital marketers, some rumors started a long time ago that if you give people too many options, they won't make any choice, right? So it was always one call to action. But how do you also develop your calls to action to meet those listeners where you are? And what we have found is a welcome page is the perfect answer to both of those conflicting ideas. So a quick rundown. We get so many questions about this because it's not a standard marketing practice outside of, I would say, Interview Valet. But so a podcast interview welcome page is essentially a customized website, bare bones page on your website that connects those podcast listeners over to your site and into your marketing funnel. It's the best way we have found that podcast guests can drive their listeners to your leads. And it's turning those passive listeners to an active visitor on your site. Yeah. And if you think about it this way, a listener might hear about you, learn about you for the first time on a podcast. If they listen to your interview for 30, 45 minutes, they're kind of invested into you, right? Because if not, they would have turned you off a long time ago. But you still need a bridge to connect them from listening to that podcast in their headphones while they're working over to your website. And again, the welcome page is the most concise and simple way to drive that traffic over there.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I will typically tell my clients is that a lot of times people listen to podcasts when they're running, when they're driving to work, they're busy, they're multitasking. I know I listen and I'm doing something else. So in an effort to keep it simple and, something that they can remember, how great is it to have that welcome page and that specific URL that is catered to that particular podcast so that they then can go from listening to finding you later.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about that, is probably one of the biggest mistakes we hear podcast guests do, right? There's often that time at the end of the interview, where can our listeners find you? And like you said, they might be driving in the car, they might be running, exercising, and people are spouting off their phone number, their email address, their LinkedIn handle. But really, when you give them a concise website, and it can be like interviewvalet.com /podcast guest or something like that, something that ties directly to that specific podcast, that's easy for them to remember. And then when they get there, all of your information is on that page, right? You're going to have all your social media handles, your email, any lead opt-ins you might have. All of that's right there in one place. And it really makes it easy for you to say that answer in a nice, pretty, friendly way. And then also makes them easy for the listener to find you.
Yeah. And I also think that with that, and I try to advise my clients on, saying it a couple of times organically throughout the interview. We don't want it to be salesy, but the more you're able to sort of, if you're talking about something and you say, hey, find my, I have my book on my website here, Interview Valet /book, in the middle as you're talking about it. And then maybe you talk about it again at the end. It just sort of that repetition also helps create, it in their memory so that they're able to go and visit. And I think that sometimes, like people will say the URL, but they won't say, come to my website to find XYZ, right? So we don't want it to be, hey, go and find me on LinkedIn, because how many Kristen Nolans are there, right? I may never be found, because there's 50 of them. And, a lot of times people can't see me. So then the pictures do them no good either. So yeah, welcome pages are very, very important. How can podcast guests measure the success of their marketing funnel? And are there any metrics or indicators that you recommend focusing on to assess the performance?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another next question we get so many times. It's like, how can you identify your podcast guesting ROI? And really, there's a few ways. So the welcome pages we just discussed is a great way. What you can do is you put a tracker on there, or you can track those pages through your Google Analytics, or get an extra plugin like a Hotjar or something like that, and track those page visits. That's another way that you can track audiences that resonate with you, right? If you're in that testing phase. I noticed a lot of interviews from dentists on dentist-based podcasts are really, they're visiting these pages more. So a page tracker. Another one is just internally tracking your opt-ins on your page. So let's say you have a few calls to action on that page, right? Maybe you have a guide. Maybe you have a book a discovery call, a consultation. Putting a tracker on that, right? Some type of, if you give that a unique code, like it goes specifically to that pipeline on your back end, you'll know that people only downloaded that guide from this specific opt-in from hearing me on podcast. That's another great way to definitively track on your back end that people are coming in specifically from your podcast interviews rather than any of your other marketing channels.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, one tip that I think came to mind for me is that sometimes people will use come sign up for my email list as a call to action. And I'm like, nobody wants to come and sign up for another email where they're just going to click delete, right? So like it needs to be something of value. So just a quick tip there. What strategies do you suggest for podcast guests to maintain engagement and nurture leads from podcast appearances long term?
Yeah, so this goes into when I talked earlier about the pre and post interview marketing, right? The two pieces of the pie. This really ties into the post interview, right? So we're talking about repurposing your interview, networking, being a gracious guest. Those are three really good ways to maintain that engagement and nurture those leads. I think one thing that's often overlooked is that being a gracious guest. Because there's also a fine line of guests should not be using and abusing the podcast host show and all their hard work and efforts. You know, if you look at it from the host perspective, they have worked really hard to build their audience, build their show. Producing a show is a lot of work. And so when guests just show up, talk, and walk away and do nothing else and wipe their hands of it, it leaves kind of a bad feeling for them as well. And we know that podcast guests do develop reputations for the quality of guests that they are. So I would say really connecting with the show is a really good way to nurture that time and money investment for you. And also, again, you get a reputation. Many hosts know other hosts, right? So we've seen this so many times that if you do really well on one show, well, that host probably has 4 other friends who do a podcast on similar topics that they can then personally introduce you to. And right. So it starts building this network. And another thing is just networking in general, right? Connecting with these people on social media platforms, engaging with them, right? Just don't use and abuse, I think would be the consensus there.
Yeah. And my colleague Louise and I actually did a podcast episode on the promotion part of it. So go and listen to that for some additional details there. But also, I think it's really important to make sure that when you're being a gracious guest, that I always advise my clients, the first thing you do when you get an invitation is go directly to their LinkedIn and connect. See what they're all about, see what they're posting, respond to an email and say, hey, I'm really excited to meet up and have a conversation with you. Or, hey, I listened to a couple of your podcasts and these are really great things that I saw you talking about. I'd love to dive in and talk about those things. And so I think it's really that connection as well, because I think that's what, some of my clients who have been most successful do those things. So those are all great tips. You mentioned earlier post-interview marketing. Do you want to go into a little more detail with that?
Yeah, I touched on that a little bit there, but another key factor here that I think is worth diving into a little bit more is that repurposing. If you think about it, when you talk for 30, 45 minutes on a podcast, you are generating a gold mine of content, right? The average person talks, I think, about 150 words a minute. If you break that down, that is so much content that you can repurpose and repackage into your other marketing channels in your business. And guests, again, often when they use and abuse, right, they talk and walk away, they are leaving all of that opportunity on the table. You have spent time to prepare and connect with this show and get on this and become a guest on this show. And then you leave all of that. It's really dropping the ball. And so that's where you can take one interview. We've found that you can take one interview and turn it into about a month's worth of content, right? You can pull that transcript. You can turn it into a blog. You can turn it into a newsletter to your list. Depending on what you talk about, you could pull out 7 things to consider before being a podcast guest, right? You could pull out a list from there, create a 2-page download guide. You can take those video snippets and audiograms. We all know the TikTok style reels and videos are so popular right now. In a 30-minute interview, you could get probably 20 video snippets that you could create and then share across all of those platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all of that supports those video formats. And you're out there indefinitely, right? And it's you sharing hard-hitting snippets of your expertise and how you can serve people. So I would say that's the biggest differentiator between people who do podcast guests and people who are podcast guests and people who do podcast interview marketing.
Absolutely. And one other thing that I know I've heard my clients use is they will use the podcast as a tool for potential clients, or if they've spoke about something specific and that's relevant to a client of theirs, they'll share the podcast episode and say, hey, I went into a great deal of information on this. Listen to this podcast and then let's have a conversation around it. The next time we speak. So there's so much value in how you can sort of repurpose and reuse those conversations and those episodes.
Absolutely. And it's a good way to kind of weed out people that you don't think would be a good fit for your client, right? If you're wanting to sign on a coaching client, and you send them the homework of, hey, go watch my interview on this show. Like you said, this really laid out what I do, how I do it. If that person doesn't have the 20 minutes, 30 minutes to listen to your episode, it probably might be an indicator they're not a good fit for you, right? You know that they're not going to do the homework that you give them on the back end when you're working together.
Yeah. And you can also sort of give them a feel for the type of coach you are, right? So they get a feel. So it's like a mutually beneficial, collaboration together to ensure that you're both a good fit for each other. That's one of the things that I love is like, it's sort of a try before you buy thing where you can, really get to know someone. So, okay. So what are some of the successes that guests have seen from a marketing perspective that have effectively driven clients with podcast guesting?
There's a few great examples there. One of those ties into kind of what we were just talking about. In addition to the doing your homework, right, and getting a feel for you, it's also the benefit of a shared stage, right? It gives you a level of authority. Hey, I guested on this show, right? I guested on Entrepreneurs on Fire. So as a byproduct of that, it puts you in the same room as any other guest that's been on that show, right? So that's why it's so beneficial. And we've seen so many times people utilize that. Hey, just like we'll see also featured on, right? And it's also featured in Harvard Business Review or something like that. That's one of the best successes we've seen with clients is just that shared stage. Some more specific benefits we've seen, we've had several people come to us and say that you record interviews, they sit, they're in production, they're scheduled. So sometimes it takes a couple months for your interviews to start getting some traction. But we've had so many people come to us and say from one interview, just one interview going live, they've recouped their ROI from one interview. Jeff Barch is a great example of that from Story Greenlight. He recouped his investment for podcast guesting from just one interview. He had a client reach out to him directly for a custom consulting package that was more than what he invested to do podcast guesting. Another one was Luis Scott. I think you worked with him, Kristen, right, on his experience with that, his coaching client.
Yeah, he mentioned that he had a potential client listen to him on a podcast and called and hired him. And it was almost a 6-figure commitment, which was incredible because that was, when you talk about return on your investment of time and money, that alone, set the stage for his entire year. So he saw, such a return on that. And I think that really comes down to doing, and as we previously talked about, is like doing the right things, right? We're not just showing up and we're not just talking about our product and we're going home. we're showing up, we're being a gracious guest, we're promoting and we're repurposing. And that's where you get the return on the investment. Okay. So on the flip side of that, what are some common challenges that clients face when integrating podcast guesting into their marketing strategy? And how does Interview Valet help overcome them?
One of the biggest is we have talked about is just not really understanding, not having the opt-ins or the opportunities for people to engage with you, right? To even have one call to action, or to have the welcome page, or to be networking on social media. Down to the more granular level, though, is the systems, right? Where is this opt-in or this download being housed, right? And that really comes down to your, like, having a good CRM or something like that, where you can physically capture those people. You know, if you go to something and you download a guide, you usually put in a name and an email. Well, it's like, where are you housing that name and an email to automate that email to go out, to send the guide, to send them into a nurture sequence, to send them into next steps. So I would say that's probably another challenge, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you haven't considered that, it's going to be a rude awakening when you realize all the opportunities you're missing because you don't have a good CRM. And there's lots of them out there. Keep is one. We use HubSpot. We're actually absolutely big fans of HubSpot because it's really a one-stop shop for everything. But something along those lines to automate that for you, because we know you're busy, right? If you have a download guide come in at 10 o'clock at night, you're not going to be always at your computer to manually send that email out and get that out to them and engage with them. So having a good system in place is really key to putting that on automation for you.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing that, I personally enjoy is that I'm not just like, as a client account manager, I'm not just like a scheduler. I don't just like say here, it's like a consultative. Like, I look at myself as a partner to my clients. Their success is my success. And so I want to make sure that I'm giving them all of the information so that they're able to maximize the impact of their campaign in their time. So how do you see the future of podcast guesting evolving within the broader marketing landscape?
I see it at, we saw this with AI a lot, right? It tilted marketing and digital marketing on its head the last couple of years. And I would say leaning into that more. Consumers, it used to be something like 8 touch points to produce a sale. Then it was like 18 or so. I think we're up to like 20 something. So people need that know, like, and trust, right? The first thing somebody does, if they see you or hear your name, they're going to Google you. They're going to look at your website. They're going to look at your LinkedIn. Are they present on social media? Do they have any content out there? If you go to a bare bones site and they haven't posted on Facebook in 3 years, it removes your credibility as an active participant in that industry. So, and again, that ties into podcast guesting is the quickest way to build that know, like, and trust, because they're hearing you there and they need that. We are all desperate for authenticity right now. AI has made us all a little leery. I think every email that comes through my inbox, I'm like, is this a real person or is this a bot? I can't tell because they're getting really clever in their languaging. And so I think that's where podcast guesting is really going to solidify in the marketing landscape as a power player in connecting and, those high touch sales like that.
Yeah, I think it's really about making yourself stand out, right? Like, there are so many people that may do, similar things to what you do, but what is it that you do the best out of all of your competitors? And how do you lean into that to differentiate yourself? Why you're the, the choice of your potential consumers. Just as an example, I worked for an organization years ago, and we were hiring for a CMO. And, all these people came in and they interviewed. And I remember one of the candidates sent in, it was a brand new Nike shoe. with a note that said, I want to put my best foot forward. And so, those things are like, what is it that we can do that are memorable? I had another client that he was a business coach, and he would meet with the hosts, and how he would connect with them after is he would send them a personalized book based on the conversation that they had. So he was building that trust with them, there. And then it turned into this, a referral system and different things like that. So just figuring out ways that we can differentiate ourselves and make us, make ourselves, more well-known and, memorable, I think. Okay, perfect. So what makes podcast interviews particularly effective for the top of funnel awareness stage?
I would say it's a combination of everything we've talked about here, right? You're capturing people on a personal basis. One of our core values that we adhere to is, in the age of automation, it's the personal touch that makes a difference. Like, I love the example you just gave about the Nike shoe, by the way. But that's it though, right? It's you're connecting with people on a personal basis. There's countless coaches or consultants in the world. Why should I pick you? And that's where you really capture people with that top of the funnel and lead in. And when you build those systems out, it's going to naturally weed out and repel those non-fitting clients for you, and really just only attract the ones that you both can connect and really have a good synergistic partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important, to really weed out and make sure that we're not spinning our wheels and wasting our time with, people that, aren't going to be potential clients. So I think that's a really great point. What trends should businesses watch for to stay ahead of in utilizing podcast guesting effectively?
We've found, like I said, with AI and things, that it is almost changing by the day. What we're all just kind of being led around of what we're worried about this week. And I think it's just being really in tune with the narrative of your ideal clients, your existing, your past ones, and what they care about right now, presently. And that will be industry specific. If you're in investing, it might be a little weird time for you, right? Election year always throws things off. Just kind of the political environment throws things off. So getting in front of those concerns that they're having right now and preemptively addressing them. Because what you do, when you do that, you are becoming the answer to their problem. You're becoming their problem solver. And at the end of the day, that's what we all want, right? We want, when we're seeking a professional service firm, we're doing that because we need somebody to help us with an issue or problem we're having. And so you need to put yourself out there as the solver of that specific problem. So just stay in tune with them, stay in touch, have conversations with your clients, talk to them occasionally, maybe quarterly, just like, how are you? What's going on? Being that a person to them, not just an avatar of a talking head, right? I think that's so important right now.
Yeah, being that partner and being that, person, I think is super important, especially in today's landscape. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yes, Kristen, thanks so much. It was so great talking to you. Thanks.
What an insightful conversation with Tiffany. She really broke down the importance of having a solid marketing funnel in place so that you can get most from every podcast interview. Remember, it's not just about showing up and talking. You need to create a bridge from your interview to your website and then guide your listeners into becoming clients. So here's your next step. Take a close look at your current marketing funnel. Do you have a clear call to action? Are you making it easy for listeners to connect with you after the podcast? If not, it's time to make these adjustments. And don't forget, every podcast is an opportunity to build relationships and grow your business. So be a gracious guest and promote the episode. Thanks for joining us. And be sure to check out Interview Valet for more resources to help turn their listeners into your clients.